Chelsea Watego is a Mananjali and South Sea Islander woman with over 20 years of experience working within Indigenous health as a health worker and researcher. She's a professor of Indigenous health, a prolific writer, author of two acclaimed books that we're going to discuss today, a public intellectual, a director of the Institute for Collaborative Race Research, was one half of the Wild Black Women radio podcast show, which apparently means the pressure is on us today, and a proud mom to five beautiful children. An all-round underachiever. I was like, I think you made a mistake here. Pretty sure. Yes, an all-round underachiever, and it is such a huge pleasure to be in conversation with you, Chelsea, today. And thank you so much for joining us on Two Pals in a Pod.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this yarn.
Chelsea, Rhonda, and I live on stolen land, obviously, and we'll get right into it. We often like to start our episode with a reflection because we are beneficiaries of settlement. We're also victim survivors of Western imperialism. So often when we have Palestinian and Arab guests in particular, we ask them not just for their asl, their roots or their origin story. We ask them to reflect on whose sovereign, unceded land that they live, love, fight, and protest on. Today, as I said, we're deeply honored to have you on our podcast. We wanted to ask you if you could share your origin story with us, the OG, and tell us, the unceded country that you were born on and raised on, and which country you live, love, fight, and protest on today.
Thank you. So I was born and raised on Yagara country, in the outer southern suburbs of what people know as Brisbane or Maganjan. My family we belong to the Yugambeh language group, and our family has largely stayed within the boundaries of the Yugambeh language region from northern New South Wales through to out west and sort of largely in southeast Queensland, and that movement has been shaped by the Queensland Protection Act of evading government control and dispossession and relocation. And so I have Aboriginal and South Sea Islander ancestry through intermarriage. My great-grandmother left her country I believe it was the 1930s, and went across the border to northern New South Wales. So I have family connections in northern New South Wales, up through to North Queensland. But I've largely had the privilege of living and working on Yagara country. And for me, home is Anala, which is out of the southern suburb of Maganjan, which is home to a very proud and strong, vibrant Black community.
I love your use of the word vibrant because that's the impression I always get of you. And every, Instagram post and every encounter I've had with you, every conference I've attended with you, I think the one thing I've learned is the power of joy, the power of being vibrant, the power of laughter as just this really bold face of sovereignty, and something that has been deeply inspiring for me when I just want to sit and cry in a corner sometimes. So that's been something that I've really honestly learned from you.
Oh, thank you. I still remember I first went to uni at 17, and that was when I discovered that we were a sick and a sad people through the epidemiological texts that were written about us. And I didn't know that world until I went to university. And so I've always been insistent on our own reality of we grew up working poor, but there was an organ in our lounge room, there was noise, there was laughter. I think about even funerals. There's a lot of joy at funerals and connection and this idea that we're supposed to be these one-dimensional characters that are can only be sad, mad, or bad. And I know my world to be vibrant.
I think also
so it's not even
the
a
children.
performance.
Yeah, and it's the children, isn't it, as well?
Definitely, but also just on that, it's interesting that you brought up funerals or sort of things that are supposed to be times of mourning, and I think I always reflect on the fact that weddings, births, deaths are always, I call it a bit of a spectacle, maybe, but also the reason they are about that, the bringing of people together, is because it's leaning on community and community care and that vibrancy. And they are also supposed to be, yes, occasions of grief, but also the bringing together means the joy and the leaning into that. I just love that. I love that about our communities.
Yeah, and this idea that, I mean, even in loss, I mean, those
Yeah.
ceremonies about celebrating the life. And of course, we often feel most sad because those lives were so special. And so to me, it's holding those two things at once. That, yeah, I grew up going to funerals where there were celebrations of people's lives, and not all loss can be celebrated. There's so much loss that, of course, is unjust, is violent, is cruel. And so it's not to, this sort of toxic positivity kind of nonsense. But I always think about holding on to the things that mean most to me and embracing that, and not just being centered on what has been lost to me. And so it's just trying to hold those two things at once.
Especially when colonizers take space everywhere, you want to reclaim your own little space of family, of community, and say, we're not going to let you be here. We're going to turn our backs to you and not think about you. We're going to respond to you. We're going to create our own reality, like you said here.
And if anything we learn of 2025 is that laughing at the violence of settler colonialism will get you in all kinds of trouble, which is hilarious too.
They haven't taken they've tried to take satire away from us, actually, but we won't let them. Chelsea, only last week you launched your latest prop, please, brilliant book offering, Black Thoughts Matter, essays on Black love, Black power, and Black joy. The fact that my questions are so long and Sarah's questions are so long speaks to how much we adore your work. And we're not just doing this in this lickspittle ingratiation towards you. You really have produced such incredible work that crosses over into our way of thinking about the word processing and interpreting it. Now, this book follows your Searing 2021 book, Another Day in the Colony.
Another prop?
Yeah. Also an essay collection written in 2020 in the midst of COVID-19, Black Lives Matter movement, the 250th anniversary of Captain Cook's voyage along the east coast of so-called Australia. Every page of Black Thoughts Matter, and indeed Another Day in the Colony, are just filled with truth bombs. Another Day in the Colony is a fiercely intellectual and scholarly work. It doesn't conform to conventional, I would say, racist white regulations about what a scholarly academic work should look like. It includes images from your personal archives. It has your daughter's Harmony Day drawing. It has court briefs, PhD certificate, police indictments, and even a song playlist, which I think, as the musical person in this duo,
I love.
Sarah really appreciates.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, your new book starts by interrogating what counts as good writing, as Black thought and critique. And you write this beautiful line. You speak about the strength to speak not defensively, but sovereignly. And this characterization of speaking and writing as an act of sovereignty, I think, is a principle shared with Indigenous peoples around the world. And it reminded us a lot of Muhammad al-Kurd's book, Perfect Victims, in which he's very upfront about the tonal shifts in his book, his avoidance of jargon, his writing style, and he says it reflects the sovereignty of this kind of narration. So we, put those two pieces together. So can you talk to us about what it means to write and speak sovereignly, and how do you assert your sovereignty in that intimacy of storytelling, words, and the tonal shifts you choose to write and speak in?
Yeah. I remember when Another Day came out and I got to do interviews, and that's back when I was invited to writers' festivals, where I'd have, and it would be, of course, largely white women who weren't scholars, who would announce my book as being not an academic text, which I find hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, here I was, I'm a full professor, and I've written a book, and because I'd written for blackfellas and made that very clear, that's who I've written a book for, that suddenly it wasn't academic. And of course, that would be that framing when we understand how race works and the idea that we are intellectually inferior, and we see that being reproduced by the most well-meaning progressive white women in the literary space. And I mean, my thing was, and I think it was Professor Linda Tuwai-Smith, I think it was, and I may be wrong, but I think it was the 50th anniversary of the ATSIS conference, and there was her, Professor Martin Nakater, Professor Morton Robinson, and Linda Tuwai-Smith each day. And Auntie Linda talked about what's the importance of doing intellectual work if our people don't understand it. And, I still remember doing the PhD and giving it to mum and dad, and, they had to go at the introduction, but that was kind of it. And it made me question, what is the point of all of this if we're not speaking to our people and with our people and thinking with our people? And I didn't want to be one of those Black academics that was like the Black whisperer, alibying settler colonial violence through our cultural otherness. I grew up in a house where me and Dad would argue over the newspaper every morning. He had some interesting political views, but I think he just would take a different position to make me argue with him. So I grew up in a house where we did know, where we were encouraged to contest the stories told about us. And so I didn't grow up with this kind of anti-intellectualism in our home. I mean, we only had the 1970s World Book Encyclopedia set and the Bible in the toilet, and that was about it in terms of literary material in our home. And the old Courier Mail, whatever it was called back in the day, so that was the resources I had available to read, and I'd go to the local Brisbane City Council library van that would park once a month at the local shops to get books, kind of thing. So I had a love for thinking, and I didn't realise growing up that thinking was something that we weren't supposed to do as blackfellas, that we couldn't know, that blackfellas weren't interested in reading and thinking. That was bizarre to me. But I've noticed, working in academic institutions, there's this idea that we can never know. And even the fact that, my insistence that there is a market for Black readers, that was seen to be absurd, that I still had to, in all of my work, explain to the white reader, send to the white reader, attend to the white reader. That to me was just odd. Because I didn't accept this racialized location that we're cast in. So I don't know whether it's a sovereign position. I just believe that as a black fellow, I like to think about things and debate ideas, and that other black fellows want to too, irrespective of how white people think of us. I didn't want to present an indigeneity that was somehow focused on educating or appealing to white sensibilities and white supremacy. And there is so much intellectual and creative work that is by black fellas that is made for white fellas, and that makes me slack a bit. So I think I just wanted to, I think about being a sovereign writer, but it's about thinking about the Black reader and centering the Black reader. What do the minds and souls and hearts of black fellas need to hear? Because there is so much violent stuff that's said about us.
Your answer really reminds me of that quote by Fred Hampton, theory without practice. Oh, this is an amended version, theory and practice ain't shit, exactly. And I think without being rooted in, centered in your people or people communities, and resisting that sort of elitist gatekeeping that decides what is considered intellectual and who is the default audience, the status quo. And it's interesting because I imagine you also have commercial considerations that you would have also resisted in that framing. You go.
I refuse the footnoting.
Yeah.
Poor Aviva at UQP, she had experience with
She's can I say a victim of the three of us, a survivor of the three. Three of us are here. Yeah.
And I'm really grateful for the journey that we had with the book, because it wasn't the what ended up being the book was not what was initially imagined, and there was this interesting irony that it was about UQ in some respects. That story appeared in the midst of the process of writing the story, but. Yeah, and some of the conversations we had in this editing process, I think there was, and it was funny because there was a line in the intro where I say, "This is not for white people," kind of thing. And she suggested that I perhaps have a disclaimer that, because she's like, because the progressive white person who reads that line will go, "Oh, I can't read this and I better put it down." And I thought it was absurd, but it turns out I got quite a few emails from white women apologising for having read the book.
Bless. It's okay. You can approach.
You can read stuff that doesn't center you. Welcome to our world.
Yes.
We need to do that all the time. I was just explicit about it and transparent about that. So yeah, and I refused to the footnote. I was not about explaining. If you understood it, you understood it. And to me, this is very much about the protocols that govern Indigenous knowledge production, is that there is some knowledge that is not available to everyone.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And if you don't have a frame of reference for understanding, then that's not meant for you, but you might get something else.
Yes.
And that's okay. This idea that knowledge exists out there that anyone can access and obtain and possess and extract, it's so foreign. And this idea that you can be a knowledge holder without knowing everything, without having to be the authority. And we understand how knowledge production works. Certainly Western knowledge production, it is to possess. It is to take over. And this is thinking about what's a non-possessive way of knowing. And I could know some things, and there's lots of things that I don't know as a black fella, but that doesn't erase my blackness. It's just not what that's not my expertise, and that's someone else's. And that lots of knowledge holders can coexist, and that's okay. But I think you come into institutions like universities, where you're meant to it's a hierarchical structure where you're meant to know more than someone else, and that's just not how it operates in a lot of our communities. And it's quite a shame job to play a part of that system.
And to be part of these neoliberal sort of extractive institutions that determine and designate what is allowed and what knowledges are worthy of consumption and, I guess, spreading, and which ones aren't.
And the other thing is, I've done the educative approach to our presses. So my first job as an Aboriginal health worker / hospital liaison officer in rural Queensland was delivering the employer's compulsory 2-day cultural awareness training. That was fun, but I realised the limitations of the educative approach, that it's not an absence of manual with manners, that why racial violence persists. I have tried the let's teach white people, and then they'll treat us better, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But what it does and how it works on us is what concerned me. And so when I was then teaching at UQ, and I was, St. Lucia as a suburb is not that far from Anala, but it felt miles apart in terms of our ways of being. But also I would go to work each day and I was giving my best intellectual work to a white institution, and I'd come back to my community and my family and they'd get the least of me.
Yeah.
And I was kind of, what am I doing this for? Who's benefiting from my labour? So it was also redirection of my energies to go, well, actually I want to give my best to my own family, my own community. You go to your board meetings for the community organisation late at night and you're exhausted. I don't want to give my best work to violent institutions.
I love how like institutions are now catching up to this because they're writing this whole decolonization is not a metaphor, and this little cottage industry of white experts on decolonization and Indigenous methodologies and Islamophobia, and so we have to beg them for jobs. We have to beg them to get on their grants and their projects. But this idea that that they can use our community exploiter and then climb that hierarchy and then police our work. And in particular, there's this sort of fetishization of our translation work, because we don't do it to put something on the CV that comes into a promotion category. We do it, like you said, because we're here to serve and speak to our communities. And I remember with my PhD, I published it as a book with Routledge, because I was told that's, a prestigious academic book publisher. I didn't have a launch because it was so ridiculously expensive. And in the end, a book that I had written for my community, I couldn't celebrate with my community. So I decided I'd write the next one as a trade publication. And then, I was told, well, why didn't you publish with an academic publisher? And so there's always these, these, like you said, elitist gatekeeping. And when it serves the institutions to talk about the fact that they have people of color doing amazing work in communities, they'll exploit that. But when they want to pull you down for that work, they'll do that at the same time.
Oh, and also if you're too successful in that stuff, they'll weaponize it. So you get brought before research ethics and integrity around conflict of interest or being involved in your community organizing.
Oh, that's I was about to say, should we talk about the symposium then? That's a great segue.
Let's go to the next question.
Great segue. But a very quick side note, because what you said really resonated and spoke to me, because just last night I was having a conversation with a Palestinian person who was extremely concerned and exhausted. They're at their workplace, they're being exposed to all sorts of violences. I'll keep it, top line, and essentially said, I don't know if I should stay or go, but staying means I can keep pushing the Palestine sort of perspective and that genocide is wrong. And I said, having been in similar situations and facing this institutional violence, I think what I'm thinking about, what's going to matter to me at this point in time, is the fact that I'm going home exhausted, depleted, as you said, not being able to give to my community, my family, my people. But also, it's we've done our time. I mean, you stayed in this institution, very little has changed. Let other people do the work. When I left a particular place in the past, which will definitely not be named or familiar to anyone, but leaving that place, I was confident that at least there were a lot of good people, a lot of good, a lot of conscientious people of all backgrounds, but particularly white people, who were actually prepared to do the heavy lifting at that point on Gaza, or at least to the extent that they could. But the reality is they're never going to embody it in the same way. They're never going to experience it the same way. They're not going to take it home in the same way. Like, I don't switch off at 5 and go home and stop thinking about the violence you're subjected to, nor about the genocide happening on the ground. And so you do have to think about these things, and you'd hope that there's room for you to just leave it if it's about preserving your own well-being, sanity, if you have that ability, and just let them deal with that for once. I mean, the
stay or go thing, which is
yes,
a core idea in discipline, Rhonda, that we were speaking about, because we did a chapter of it in reading group, and the stay or go. And working with people who've dealt with largely employee-based race discrimination and what to do with it. For me, I think it's letting go of the idea that staying in the fight only exists with staying with our employer. And so we can stay in the fight, but sometimes you may realise that the battleground just may be a different location. And so redirecting where our front line is may not be a going, it's not a leaving. It's a redirection. And oftentimes we have people who are grappling with, I've got to stay. I've got to see this through. I've got to affect the change for the next people that comes through. Leaving is losing. I've let them,
A
and I
false
had to
binary.
and I had to grapple with that stuff of going, well, I'm walking from a tenured position a few days before an industrial relations case. And I learnt to see leaving as winning. And in a few different ways of relinquishing the power they had over me and keeping me in a fight that actually wasn't in my interests, because it was about a career, not the cause. And it's the cause that brought me to the work, not the career of being an academic. So I had to kind of shift that. And, I've written about only little Watson helping me think about where is the fight? What is the fight? And I know we've yarned about, when we come out fighting, which is going to land the biggest punch. Like, if I'm going to swing, like being strategic about the fight, and not that sort of crisis and reactive, or that, but being trapped in a relationship with our abuser. And it's okay to leave, and the wins we can claim from leaving certain places where we're not going to shift that, but where maybe we have our most impact. And I could have stayed working at UQ as a tenured academic and being shipped around and all that kind of stuff. We wouldn't have built ICRR had that been the case. I wouldn't have ended up here at Karumba and built this Black knowing agenda, and doing the work with people that share those values. I would have been fighting to stay in being right, but I wasn't free.
I love
So I
that
had to
career, of
rethink.
course. Yeah.
And given the last 2 years, I think that's going to speak to so many Palestinians. And honestly, I really can't wait to send that to the person that I was speaking to. I think it's going to perhaps bring in a really critical perspective, if not change their mind completely. But to go back to the symposium, so Chelsea, you organized the National Symposium Unifying Anti-Racist Research and Action earlier this year, and both Rhonda and I were invited, and we presented on panels. It was one of the most intellectually and emotionally uplifting and invigorating spaces that we had been in, both in recent times, again, in the context of what's going on in Gaza, but also just ever. And so, well, it was uplifting, except for, of course, the not one, not two, but all three of us and many others being subsequently vilified, defamed, attacked, investigated, and punished by institutions who cowered and indulged, the pro-Israel Zionist lobbyists and Murdoch media, of course. So there's a lot that binds us, and we can now add to our obviously what's the word? Lustrous? Is that the word?
Oh,
Yes,
illustrious.
illustrious podcasting careers, that we will forever be bound in these shared experiences of being falsely accused of being anti-Semites. So it's rather ironic, of course, or perhaps not, since you've written extensively about institutional violence. We're just talking about it, and the essays in your new book obviously explore that as well. In it, you address the violence of academia, of healthcare, sports, media, even so-called human rights organizations. That one's hitting a nerve. And there's one quote in particular that resonates deeply. There is one quote in particular that really resonated deeply with us, and I was hoping that you would be able to read it for us.
Our power as a people is witnessed in the force of their resistance to us. When an institution directs so much of its energy and resources towards breaking us, it speaks to their fear of our power and not our powerlessness. We must stand in our power, for it is only in knowing ours that we know the false claim of theirs. This is Black power. Rage must be the register.
Yeah. At a time when we have seen the masks lifted on every single institution in this colony in the context of Israel's genocide in Gaza, please talk us through this incredibly powerful manifesto for how to face institutional violence.
I think I wrote that back when I was up against another university, my employer, as well as dealing with the Queensland Police Service race discrimination complaint. And it was a place where I was broken, like physically. I think I lost a tooth during that time. It like fell out. My body was feeling the violence. My mind wasn't paying attention to it because stubborn was, facts. But it took a toll on my body. And I had to make sense of what was happening and why it was happening. And oftentimes when we're subject to violence, we think about what did we do? What should we have done? Like we visit the violence on ourselves. It's really interesting to me that victims of racial violence aren't treated as victims of violence in the same way that we would treat a victim of, say, domestic violence. The things we tell victims of domestic violence lie in stark odds with what we tell victims of racial violence. We tell people to leave abusive relationships. We assure them that there's nothing they could have done. We don't say, oh, just be nicer to them and they'll stop doing it to you. Like the violence of what we tell victims of racial violence, what we then take on ourselves in our own heads around that. But it struck me, and I was actually on country when I was writing that and thinking about it and working out what my decision would be and realising that it's because I had power that they were coming for me. I didn't have institutional power. I had a power that they couldn't contain or control. And it's really hard to, I think particularly women of colour, how we've been socialised to believe that we're not entitled to be powerful. We are to be of service. We are to be kind, be loving. And the idea of being powerful is at odds with all of those things. But I could be all of those things all at once. And to realise that, I do have power. And that is why they are coming for me. And, I always have this thing where you write stuff, and I always like when it checks out. When there's an evidence-based, because it might sound good in theory, but does it really work? And I think about in that moment when I'd written that, I didn't know what was ahead. And that was the time in which I was being pressured to accept a payment from a university to keep quiet, which would mean revising my whole book, and that I couldn't say anything at all that was critical about a university, which I did my undergrad training with, which has shaped the formation of a new field. So it meant actually changing even the story I told of myself as a scholar. And I remember getting the email it was late at night because I was working on edits, and I saw what was on offer, and I went to cry because they had me in a corner. Like I didn't have a choice. I had to accept this. The union were going to pull if I didn't accept that offer. The book was, up in the air. And I went to like Gam and cry like, and something slapped me and I stopped mid-cry. And I made the decision that I wasn't accepting it. And at the time, I'm a single mother of 5 kids. I didn't know I was going to have a job, what I was going to do, how I was going to exist and provide for my kids. So I refused. I walked. It would be not quite a year later where I got my first royalty payment. And I kid you not, the amount was the exact same amount they offered to keep me quiet.
Oh my God.
And every subsequent royalty payment has the University of Queensland, which has been much more than that original payment. And so for me, that line that was written before all these things happened, and it checked out that I felt powerless, but there was something that told me I wasn't. And all of the things that followed in just, and it can be lonely, and everyone will say, just take it, just behave, just do the things. And I look back, I had to then revisit that writing, and I had to reread it this year. And I think it was harder to reconcile those words this year because it wasn't just to me. it was a whole lot of other people that were affected. And I think I still carry a lot of guilt around its effect on yourselves, on others that came to what we assured was a safe space. For my team here at Karumba, who are still feeling the effects of that violence, who weren't prepared to have to come to grips with their own power, who were just coming to work to put on a conference, and did a really great job, but then had to go through this journey. And I felt guilty for people who may not have chosen this path that were now caught up in it and facing the consequences of it all. And so, yeah, this year I've had to I've had to check the workings of this. And there were some really hard moments this year where I was really, really low. The guilt of the harm, not for that I faced, but others faced. Because I don't mind what comes at me, but it's people I care about. That's when it really hits. And so it's made me think about how we look after people in the struggle. And I'm not sure I fully understood that. I think that writing initially was about my own arriving at that place, but I think collectively, how we make sense of that, that's still something I'm reflecting on and thinking about. Because there was a lot of sadness this year in terms of how it affected people, which, was not raised in the Middleton Review, even though we were absolved of it. The story of the trauma that all of what happened did to people in the midst of a genocide. I'm still a bit annoyed and angry that hasn't been dealt with and acknowledged properly. And I don't know that it ever will be. And there are a lot of people who have made the most this year of harming people who are working on the front line. And that to me has been really messed up. And there are a lot of people who benefited from staying silent in this moment, witnessing it all and not saying a thing, and getting opportunities because they've chosen to be complicit. And so there's still some other unresolved feelings, not to turn this into a therapy session, but there's still some unresolved stuff, because I still believe in justice. It may not come in the ways in which traditionally are expected, but there will be a reckoning of things that happened this year.
I guess not to deny that valid feeling of feeling guilt, because I felt it as well. But, you planted those seeds in I think it was Indigenous X that you wrote that piece, and then that beautiful quote that you read out, and that landed with us a few years later and empowered us to face this institutional violence. So everything we're doing in this moment is kind of a pay it forward for the next generation, the next group who's going to face it. And I think one thing that I've learned from all of this is we've learned some things collectively here. It's really built our solidarity and really, with the masks lifted off with these institutions, shown us that you're powerful, but you're even more powerful with us beside you, and we have power together. And so that for me I think that for all of us is the one thing that can get us through these moments of guilt and moments of feeling deeply disgusted by those who are benefiting from our trauma, from our assaults, from the way that we're being pushed down, and they just go in and take that space that's been denied to us all. So I think, that collective power that we're building in solidarity is something that's really come out of this so strong. If it had not been for that, what happened to us at that symposium, there is so much we wouldn't have been able to build together since then.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always take the learnings from me from the most, absurd kinds of circumstances and conditions. I've certainly learned a lot this year about all kinds of things. I remember we yarned a while back about, would you do it knowing what we know now? Would you have still have done it? And because there were questions placed on my moral judgment. Again, my intellectual capabilities questioned. There's nothing that we could have done differently to avoid the outcome that took place. absolutely nothing I don't believe that could have been done differently to avoid the Murdoch press and the Zionist lobby weaponising anti-racism work against Black and brown people who were on the front lines doing the work. It would have looked different, but it would have still been the same, particularly in the environment that was at the start of the year, with all the different factors at play. I love the laughter that we had in the Great Race debate. That was those who were negatively racialised who could only understand fully, and that collective laughter, watching people like crying, laughing at the absurdity of all. And of course, it was offensive then to those who are racist. I love the joy of dancing on the first night when we had our gathering, and I love the moments we shared over those 2 days, how people looked after each other, and I feel very grateful to have had that experience with people who shared those values, and there's certainly the learnings and relationships that have come out of that are kind of doing the work anyway, and things that are happening as a result. And I think sometimes we have to remember that when we get those hits, it does require us to sharpen our tools to think about where that fight is. And it propels us into a fight that's bigger than the one we first thought. And so I've had a lot of tears this year over what happened. Me and David were reflecting on Read the Play not long ago, and I did Ugly Face Cry, reflecting on certainly, particularly what happened to you, Rhonda, and the outrage I still feel towards academics who have not been as courageous as the writers have in calling the shit out for what it is. But I'm also really grateful for what was created in that moment and the possibilities and the things that have resulted since then in spite of. And it just affirmed for me that the futility of hope and the necessity of spite in doing this work.
And receipts, which I always say we keep. And until then, we've got the group chats, so that's fine with the evidence. Go Chelsea.
Yeah, sorry. And the other slap I had to do is that, of course, you're doing anti-racist work. Of course, it's going to be hard. Like, of course. And I had to sometimes I had to slap myself during this year to go, you wake up to yourself. Of course, it's shitty. Of course, and that you can actually feel all those feelings because you're human. And you can feel those things, and it's okay, and then work out, well, what am I going to do with them feelings? Yeah.
And I'm not sure that Rhonda can comment on this, but I can. And I find it perhaps it's a full circle moment in that, one of the issues that came out was a mode of or a practice that Rhonda was involved in disseminating knowledge to our communities in a way and in a mechanism that didn't fit what they deemed appropriate, what they deemed to be, acceptable. And so it kind of speaks to, again, that gatekeeping and that problematizing of our different modes of knowledge production that might reach our communities in a way that is that we know and obviously have expertise and insight into that will reach them far better than what we are allowed or what we're permitted. So kind of to go full circle to that.
Well, what annoyed me with that though, and what I've got particularly wild about is,
edit it out.
It's fine. How dare your intellectual work be of service to the people you're doing the work for? But also, I've been forced onto committee meetings to talk about reimagining research impact and research outputs. Like, there's a whole movement in the sector right now doing exactly that. But
to decolonize,
it's why I got the ARC. Yeah. That was the whole basis. Like, if you look at the actual letters of recommendation from my own university, the whole pitch, it was about reimagining what knowledge production is. And Black Palestinian solidarity. Except when it's inconvenient. Yeah, exactly.
Except when it actually works, that's what we don't want. It's just an aesthetic.
I think that when the work works, and some people can have all kinds of citations and H indexes, but the work is doing something when they come for you and try to take that from you.
Yeah.
It's because it's actually doing what it said it was going to do.
Yeah. So Chelsea, we wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this question of solidarity, because obviously we are from communities of colour who are settlers as well as the victims, as we said, of Western imperialism, and that we could spend a whole episode about what that has meant in terms of a lot of communities internalising multicultural liberal politics, assimilating, not understanding, their obligations and responsibilities on stolen land, being seduced by the idea that proximity to power will save them from being racialized. And we do see a lot of problematic, expressions of identity, Australianness in that context. I think there's a huge generational shift, and I think the work of Black people, First Nations people, has been huge in that. You've had to do a lot of labour for us to understand this. I think also the genocide has really lifted the masks and lifted the veneer of this whole story of multicultural, so multiculturalism, social cohesion. And one of the most powerful examples for me, one of my biggest learning curves, was the Aboriginal passport ceremony, which I think was in around 2012, where the passports were given by Indigenous elders to migrants and asylum seekers, and at a time when they were being locked up and detained. And it was a recalibration of what it meant to belong on this land as a guest, as a settler, without having to change who you are to appease a state that will never accept you and that will enact violence against you. That's a long way of asking you, how have we as a community got it wrong, and where do we need to get it right? How can we foster and galvanize a politics of anti-colonial refusal and solidarity, and in our communities? In particular, I'm talking about Muslim Arab communities here.
Oh wow, it's a big question. Because we have the same in our community, that belief that proximity to whiteness, will enable us to transcend race and racial violence, and so that there are many lots of people of colour who buy into white supremacy, and I get that it's not fun dealing with the reality of race. And some people would rather not know about it and just live in this fantasy world where you can buy your way out of it if you get the better job and get education, and you'll be free from it. I understand the urge for that, and particularly coming from people who have dealt with racial violence, that they're wanting to escape from it. And I know within our own mob, but also other communities of colour who come to this place for peace, who just want a better life and do not want to have to deal with that. I understand it. I think, as blackfellas, we are on the bottom rung of the racial hierarchy. We're at the very bottom, and so for some of us, we have no choice. We can't transcend it. The academic title doesn't protect us from it in the way it does for others. And so there's some of us, we just can't, there's not a choice to. And I understand that there are those that are higher up on the racial hierarchy that will do anything to stay at least one rung or two higher, to not be at the bottom, because it's not fun. I think it's important that when we look at those on the racial hierarchy as less than, it is buying into a system that also deems you less than. And I don't think people fully understand the violence they're signing up to when they work on that basis. It will betray you, because they can pull that ladder out anytime they like. And what you can guarantee is that blackfellas will always fight. for those who have been treated unjustly. Even if we've been betrayed, we'll still get up and fight for others. We're not the ones protesting, go back to where you come from. We're not the ones insisting that people forget their culture in order to be part of this nation of ours. And recognising that Black fellas have a humanity that's not configured through hierarchy.
Yeah.
And the hierarchy that people are wanting to buy into is not going to offer you protection. And you see it happen in the generations. I get, I had a father who was worked 10 times harder, rise above it, hold your head up and just do the work. And you can transcend it. But I think from a parenting perspective, sometimes we, may require our kids to just forget about the racism and just work harder. And we have to know that doesn't work for people of colour in this place. Australia is so intensely racist, and it has developed, it is a world leader in racism.
Yes.
Like, we invented offshore detention. We invented apartheid. And so I think reconciling the truth of this place in all of its ugliness actually protects yourself and your kids from what's to come. Because the betrayal, when you work your ass off to try and get in the door, only to have it slammed shut, there's a whole lot of violence that comes with that sense of betrayal, of being a good Australian and still not being included in. And also I think, there's power in numbers, and this is not a white Australia anymore. Like, collectively, we have power as people of colour to redefine the parameters of which our national identity is configured around.
We could take over the hospitals. We can take over the hospitals for a start. Oh, if every doctor of colour just say, I'm on strike until you figure out your racism.
I know there's so much possibility in solidarity in this place. And there's so much, I think, beauty yet to be discovered in doing things differently. But it does mean having to, kill the white man inside our heads.
Yes.
And reconciling the ways in which we've accepted white supremacy as the framework for our being in this place.
I think it's almost a false, you said, it won't provide protection. It's almost like a false protection, or even if you want to call it a coping mechanism, a delaying tactic, whether inadvertent or otherwise. Because I think part of recognizing these systems of violence, these structures around us, also means that you've got to reckon with your own self, your own pain, your own perhaps intergenerational trauma. And I know that's not all that we are, but that requires work. And some people are just not ready for that. They're not equipped to do that, I think. And oftentimes, we see that because then the violences are reproduced in patterns and relationships internally, like within our own communities. They're reproduced, or people internalize that hate. So doing that, I guess, inner work is also, it's almost as necessary or as important in a way, or like a foundation to being able to actually recognize those systems and structures.
And I think I get the understanding, I get the urge for peace. But I'm interested in freedom.
Yes.
And peace doesn't always offer freedom. It means oftentimes having to give up, conform, comply, and trade by all these things so that there's no disruption. And I'm really interested in freedom, like what that is, what it feels like, what it tastes like, and always thinking about, well, what is it to be free in this place? What does that mean in the everyday sense, in the mundane sense? And being freed from the logic that traps us.
I want to pick up a thread there. We didn't want to subject you today to a postmortem about the voice referendum. But there is a line in an article that you wrote that was published by Indigenous X in 2023, and it was reproduced in your new book. And it made us think of some of the criticisms leveled against those who refuse to be grateful, who refuse to be seduced by, the supposed magnanimity of states, of governments who, for instance, in this context, the most recent example of recognizing, Palestinian statehood, for example. And you wrote in the essay, sorry, we're going to keep that because we don't have the resources to edit it out. It's fine. You wrote in the essay, there is a very real demonization of Black fellas who dare answer the question of yes with a no, as though it is we who are betraying our people, as if we are the ones blowing up sacred sites. And of course, that, resonated in light of the recent conversations and distractions. And we had an episode about recognition, many parallels between our struggles in the management and regulation of how we respond to these colonizer scraps, in the reconciliation peace talks, to use peace, the voice recognition, as another parallel to that, inquests, and we've got reports and recommendations, investigations, unenforced UN resolutions, endless. So in the way that these colonizers present their meager scraps and then, stand back and watch us gleefully turn on each other in a panic about how to respond. And we see that, we've seen that lateral violence. And I guess we wanted you to speak to this.
All things. The referendum was a time. September, October was a time.
Just for our 2 or 3 cousins overseas who are listening to our podcast, it was 2023, so the same time. October, September, yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think where to start here. I think I think those 2 events at the same time and the years that have followed, I have learned so much about settler colonialism and settler colonial violence. The overt, and understanding how it works, and progress in the settler colonial imagining is always means the erasure of Indigenous peoples. And some of our people are bought into this idea of progress, not realizing that what they're consenting to is our erasure. And erasure can happen in all kinds of ways, from the overt that we see on our phones every day, to that which we cannot see in prison cells, of people being left to die and denied medical care, children being removed from their families. And so we have to understand that anytime they speak of progress, it means our erasure. And when we understand the political function of progress in a settler colonial state, that we are not against the betterment of our people. We see the reality of what that means, the way in which progress functions to eliminate. I think it was really hard being cast as an enemy of my own people during that referendum campaign. I initially didn't share my thoughts on how I'd vote because I still wasn't sure how I'd vote. I didn't have any hope, and hope was trucked out throughout that campaign. I didn't have any hope in it either getting up or doing anything because of the 3 clauses, which basically said the government of the day will decide who the select blacks are and will determine its scope, purpose and function. So there's no transference of power. It was the performance of a reconciled relationship without any actual change. So I didn't believe in it, but I didn't know how I'd actually cast my vote before it. And I didn't declare my position for a long time. And I think it was only probably a month or 2 out when I wrote that piece, because I was getting frustrated at the fights Black people were having with each other. And I've been very clear that I am not going to be angry at any Black fella for how they vote. because our vote didn't count, even if we all agreed. It didn't count. If all blackfellas agreed on yes or no, we're 3%. It wasn't going to make a difference. So why are we fighting with each other over it? But the moment I expressed my position publicly, oh my goodness, I've got people who still don't like me as a result of that position. And it makes me sad that, but this is again, this is par for course for settler colonialism.
Yes.
Is to disperse the natives, divide and conquer, turn one against the other. And the most effective thing of that referendum campaign was it divided blackfellas. And it united the racists and emboldened them. Because after that, we had the Queensland LNP government come into power on the promise of adult time, incarcerating black kids. They got in and they wiped out truth-telling inquiry and treaty process. We've seen people booing at a welcome to countries at Anzac Day ceremonies. Racists have been strengthened by the referendum campaign and result. And blackfellas have been divided. And I think that as Indigenous peoples dealing with the violence of settler colonialism, we have to understand that anything they offer us, we should have a healthy skepticism toward it without turning on each other over it. And that we can have different views on the strategy for our emancipation. And we should have healthy debates about that without being cast as an enemy by people. And it strikes me how both here and there, the track record of violence that we would entertain for 1 minute any sense of benevolence in terms of what they offer. Like, I come from a public health background. Where's the evidence base to support having any trust in what colonisers say or do? And I think about the similarities between here and there is that settler colonialism was so well rehearsed. That's why it's been so swift. And so anything we can do to slow down the machinery of settler colonial violence is actually advancing the interests of our people. And yes, we'll be met with more violence. But what's the option? Is the option just to accept it?
It's what you said. We know that they're lying. We know that we can't trust their offers of an Oslo peace process, of recognition of the voice, of a two-state, one-state. And those who champion accepting their, colonial scraps know it. And so it's back to what you said before. What people don't know is their power. They don't understand that we have the power to stand up to this. But people panic, like you said, they panic. They're seduced by the little scrap because they're so defeated, they're so oppressed, and they don't realize that you are going to exert every last inch of your energy accepting something that is going to wreak violence on you in the end anyway.
Yeah.
And just make it harder.
And I struggle with this casting of we have this positioning of the radicals and then the reformers. And the radicals are evil, and the reformers, are pure, virtuous. And many of the reformers don't recognise that their position as a reformer only exists because of the radicals. Yes. Because of the work that has happened to push that's required any concession from the state. Because the radicals didn't do that, then there would be no job for the reformer. They wouldn't need to.
They've opened up that margin for them. Yeah.
And I remember a black elected official once saying that they needed blackfellas to be screaming outside Parliament House because it made the work they did easier on the inside. And so we also have to recognise how we can occupy different political positions, but understanding how we work collectively and strategically with each other, knowing the truth of their violence. And I mean, that's the one thing that the function of the symposium was, to bring together people who fight in all different kinds of ways. And we had a mixed bag of, people who said they're conservative. And I really enjoyed that, how we share our strategies, whatever position that we're holding in the face of settler colonial violence, that our solidarities lie with each other and not with the state.
And Chelsea, you said at the beginning that one thing that you regretted or felt guilt about was that you had, given us that safe space at the symposium. And until, I feel that you should be so proud of it. Until this day, it was still the safest place I have ever felt in 2 years. And Sarah and the other Palestinians there, we felt that. We just walked in. Do you remember when we looked at it? We were like, we actually feel like we can just be ourselves here, and we're in a space where we don't have to hide the fact that we're angry and we're traumatized, and that if we're laughing, we don't have to explain why we're suddenly, expressing joy. It is a space where we can just be. And that's when you said before, I wish our communities would understand that if they turn from the colonial state and realize that there is something that is so beautiful about us coming together, then that is really where we're going to find the most power.
Yeah, and I look back on some of the joy moments there in the midst of the Australian, the journalists sneaking in to the event and being stuck outside. There's that image I returned to because there's the weight of the articles that were published by the Murdoch Press, but that image of all of us in our T-shirts in the foyer, and I still hear the echo of those chants in that foyer. And the power of that, knowing that those journalists outside could hear it echoing.
Yeah.
It's no wonder it shook the colony. And so I do love the powerful moments, and even the journalist who mistook another delegate for you, who was trying to stalk you. How upset
all
she
women
was
of color
that
look the same.
she didn't get a photo. There was lots of joy and in the midst of it, and I am grateful for those moments of realizing our collective power in those spaces, and just the beauty of it. Like, I loved. We also had some big egos. Like, here's a thing: you got academics in a room, people with profiles. And from my experience, there was none of that nonsense that you normally have at conferences. Like, we were all there together against the state.
Yeah.
And that's been a rare occasion for me at an academic conference, to really feel part of a collective whole. So thank you for sharing that.
Chelsea, at the end of every episode, we love to ask our guests a few rapid fire questions, speaking of joy and coming together and celebrating each other. So the first question is about words, or is, asking you words that you live by. So is there a quote, a poem, a verse, any piece of writing that has been anchoring you and uplifting you lately, especially in this time?
Yes, I have to acknowledge my colleague, Kevin Yayi, who's put me onto this most profound writer. It's Cardi B's Am I the Drama? At the moment, it's Better Than You, Killing These Hoes, and my favourite, Pretty and Petty.
I love it.
I'm channeling my inner Cardi B.
Love it.
Yeah, it's
You're in
doing
your
some things.
Petty era.
Yeah.
I'm so into that.
Speaking of petty, things you're no longer apologizing for. What's something you're no longer apologizing for?
All the things. Not being available for people. My intelligence. Not sorry about it anymore. And my indignance at injustice and believing that we deserve more. Not sorry.
If you could, sorry. If you could send our listeners a decolonial feminist care package to get them through these times, what would be in it?
Oh, geez. A good quality pencil and notepad, a packet of matches, some chocolate and coconut oil.
Very nice. We're not suggesting what they should do
Let
with
you
those
work out
matches,
what you're
though.
going to do with it all. But
Yeah, we would also add these into
Yes.
the mix.
Aw.
We'll put links to them as well.
Thank you.